What's crack-a-lackin', everybody? It's Phil Freeman here with another episode of FAQ OV, and today's question has to do with the solar plexus, so let's get going. Alright, so today we have a question from Bruno, and Bruno asks, do you press your solar plexus in or out? Sometimes I feel that when I press my solar plexus in, I reduce my chest space and I get tension in my throat. So given that he's been dealing with this seemingly for a while, and he feels like this is something that once he masters, he'll be able to improve his skill set. So with that said, I'll be happy to answer this question for you here, Bruno, and try to clarify what the solar plexus is, why that placement in the body is important, and how you can reduce the tension that you're feeling in your neck whenever you are bringing the energy of that air that you just brought in up in through your bronchial tubes up into the larynx and into the mask. So starting off, first of all, what is the solar plexus? The solar plexus is not necessarily a thing. It is a place in the body. It's associated with the third of 7 chakras in Eastern traditions. It is an energy source in the body in certain traditions as well. But essentially, and here's where it is. First of all, it's right at the bottom of your sternum. It's right where your rib cage starts to separate, and it's where your diaphragm sits. It's essentially a very deep rooted control center for a lot of muscles in the body. Essentially, this is something that I use as a visual tool for my students to be able to understand where the source of their voice comes from. The sternum is a great place that you can check the resonance of your voice and to bring your awareness to the source of where your voice comes from, which is your breath. So obviously, not all the tension is going to build up here. You have your abdominal muscles to think about, your obliques, even your lower body is engaged whenever you're singing. So that's why I always tell my students, before they even sing, before they even start making noise, is to work with your breath and your body first. Create an awareness of that. Experiment with it, see what works, see what doesn't, and then move on to the next step. So bringing in awareness to this area is important because the tension that's happening up here is a direct result of what's happening down here. There's a polar relationship between these two spots in the body. So given that, if you're experiencing tension, Bruno, the reason that you're experiencing that tension up here in the neck is because it's way too tense down here. So rather than thinking of trying to be as deep-rooted and stone hard as possible down here in the abdominal cavity and in the solar plexus, I want you to think of it more like squeezing a lemon slightly. So imagine that there's a lemon slice in the middle of your solar plexus, and that you're squeezing it from this angle and up, and you're just squeezing on this lemon slightly. And the louder you want to be, the more you squeeze it in, and the less loud you want to be, the less you squeeze it in. Now that will engage your abdominal muscles, that'll engage your obliques, and I want you to think of pushing in and up. And the tension that you feel in your abdominal muscles shouldn't feel like you're making a muscle or that there's excess tension there. It should feel more like, I don't know whether you can roll your stomach or not, or if you've ever seen belly dancers able to do that. That's more of a stretch tension rather than a stiff tension. So I want you to start thinking of your body movement, the ebb and flow of your abdominal muscles and your obliques in that way. More of a flow, a firmness to it instead of a tension. So, and with that said, think of your voice as in a spectrum. If you're pressing too hard and you're feeling tension here, it's way too extreme on this side of the spectrum where the tension is. If it doesn't feel like you're getting enough power, it's way too much on this spectrum. It's all about finding your spectrum, the healthy spectrum of your voice, and using that gray area and working on where those points are in your voice where it becomes too relaxed and too tense. So hopefully that gives you some perspective, Bruno, that you do want to usually press the solar plexus inward and upward. That's what I always tell my students. Pushing outward has a tendency to create a lot of tension up here, and to keep it pressed outward, that's a very forced sound. It can have some long-term, it can certainly develop into long-term issues if you keep doing that. Sometimes if you want to create that type of character in your voice, that's something that you can do, but it's something that I would not recommend, and I'm sure that's not what you're looking for, that deep, rigid sound. So pressing in and up and finding that healthy ratio and not pressing too hard, thinking of that lemon squeeze. I'm curious to hear what that does for you and to see if that makes any difference for you. It's something that has been revolutionary for some of my students and certainly has been useful in my approach to things. So given that, Bruno, everybody else watching this video, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of FAQOV. In the meantime, feel free to check out all the links at the end of this video to find out what's going on with what I'm doing as a voice coach and what I'm doing with my band, Small Town Titans. And with that said, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in again. Like I said before, always remember, practice makes progress. And with that, you can go and find your voice. Take care. Until next time.